Hey everybody, and welcome to a new video. In today's episode, I wanted to go over creating a spawning script for your animals, as well as adding a visual customization system that will allow you to have different parts of your animals be different colors or materials. As you can see here, in my scene, I have a bunch of different colored sheep, all spawned on my terrain. So the first thing I'm going to do here is cut back to my scene, and we're going to set this up. Here we are back in my scene. As you can see, I have my default little sheep. I've actually gone ahead and added some legs from the last episode. As you can see, I have my sheep game object up here. I've also gone ahead and organized the model, so you can see the head has its ears and eyes, and the body has its legs, tail, and its main body section. And the very first thing we're going to want to do with this sheep is actually create a prefab out of it. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is select my sheep and drag it into my assets folder, and then I can just delete this sheep from the scene as I now have it down here. I'm then going to go into my scripts folder and create a brand new script, and we're going to call this a spawner, and I'm going to open this up. So once you're in your spawner script, what we're going to do is come to the very bottom outside of our class, and we're going to create a new class. So what you're going to do is open square brackets and type system.serializable, and beneath this create a public class and call it animal settings. Open this up, and within this we're going to write public game object, animal prefab, and beneath this you're going to create a public int and call this spawn count. We'll default our spawn count to be maybe 10, and this will mean that we have 10 animals of this type spawning. Now we're coming back to our spawner class. We're going to go ahead and delete these two void start and void update functions, and we're going to create a list of our animal settings. What we're going to do is serialize field in some square brackets, then private list. Open this up and just type animal settings, and we're going to call this animals and equals to a new list animal settings. Beneath this we're then going to create private terrain, and we're going to call this our terrain, and then again private float terrain width, and we're going to duplicate this by pressing Ctrl D, and this one's going to be called a control length. Then we're going to create this first function, which is going to be a private void start, in which we're going to get our terrain. So we're going to do terrain is equal to terrain with a capital T dot active terrain, which will get one active terrain in our scene. Then what we're going to write beneath this is just if terrain, meaning that if terrain doesn't equals null, then we're going to get our terrain width and equal this to terrain dot terrain data dot size dot x. Again, duplicating this with Control D, we're just going to put Z at the end of this, and this is going to be our terrain length. Beneath this, we're going to call a function called spawn animals, and then we're going to create this function outside of this private void start. So coming beneath this, we're going to create a private void spawn animals, and just underneath this function, we're going to create a separate private vector3, and we're going to call this get random spawn position. And within this, we're going to be getting our random spawn position on the terrain. So what we're going to do is float x is equal to random.range 0f, comma, terrain width. And then we're just going to duplicate this, and it's going to be our float z. So we're going to rename that to float z, and we're changing this terrain width to be terrain length. Finally, underneath this, we're going to create another float, and it's going to be our float y, and we're going to equal this to be terrain.sample height, new vector3, and then open this up, and we're passing in x, 0, and z. Finally, we're just going to return a new vector3, open this up, and we're just typing in x, y, and z like so. Going back to our spawn animals, what we're going to do in here is just do a for each loop. Then we're just going to type var animal settings in animals and open this up. Then we're just going to do a for int I equals 0 colon I smaller than animal setting dot spawn count colon I plus plus, and we're opening this up again. Then we're just going to do a vector3, and we're going to call this our spawn position, and we're going to equal this to get random spawn position, which is the function we just created. And finally, we're going to instantiate our animal setting dot animal prefab, and then we're going to do a comma spawn position, which is the spawn position we just got, and finally quaternion dot identity. So now if we go back to our scene view here and we open this up, you have your spawner script ready to go. So I'm going to right click and create an empty game object. I'm going to call this spawner, reset its transform, and I'm going to drag my spawner in, and we have this list of animals, and if we click plus we get element 0. I'm going to lock my screen on this and just drag in my sheep, and I'm going to put the spawn counter to be 100, and if I zoom out and hit play, you should see 100 sheep spawn. As you can see, all my sheep have spawned, but we haven't quite set up our variation in colors yet. So they're all the default white sheep with a black head. So now what we're going to do is set up our color variation. And to do this, what we want to do is come into our scripts and animal and open up our animal script. And what we're going to do once we're in our animal script is scroll to the very, very bottom. And again, we're going to create a new class. So what we're doing is opening some square brackets, system.serializable. Then we're going to create a public class and we're going to call this visual randomization. So we're going to open this up and we're going to create a public list of mesh renderers. So we're going to type mesh renderer and we're going to call this our all mesh renderers. And again, of course, we're equaling this to be a new list of mesh renderers. Essentially what this is doing is we're going to put all the mesh renderers that we want to have the same color. So in my case, I want my tail and the body to be the same color. So I put my tail and my body there. And what we're going to do beneath this is create a public list of materials. And these materials will determine what our mesh renderers can actually have. So if I want, say, some sheep to have a black body, I would put a black material in. But if I want some of them to have a white body, I'd put a white material in. Of course, this works with textured materials as well. So if you have a texture, you can create multiple different textures and just have that apply to the entire animal. So what I'm doing now is creating a public list of materials, and this is going to be our all possible materials list. And of course, equal to new list materials. And now we are done with this new class. So what we're going to do after this is scroll back up to the top, and we're going to create a private list underneath our attributes header. So what I'm doing is a serialized field, private list, and this is going to be our attribute, what do we call this? Our visual randomization. So we're creating a private list of all possible visual randomizations. And we're going to call this visual randomizations, of course, and equal this to be a new list of visual randomizations. Then we're going to scroll down to our initialize animal function, and we're going to call a function called generate visual randomizations. And beneath this again, we're going to create a protected virtual void, generate visual randomizations. And we're opening this up. Oh, I misspelled void there, apologies. And once we've opened this up, what we're going to do is loop through all of our possible visual randomizations and apply these materials. So to do this, we're going to write for each visual randomization, and we're going to call this randomization. And then we're going to write in visual randomizations. Opening this up, we're then going to do an int, and we're going to call this a random material. And equal this to be random.range. Open that up into brackets. Then we're just doing 0.randomization.all possible materials count. Essentially what this is doing is creating an integer between 0 and the max number of materials that we have. And what we'll do next is apply this to all the mesh renderers that we want to have the same material. So to do this again, we're creating a second for each loop. And within this, we're going to type mesh renderer. And we're going to call this our sub mesh renderer. And then we're going in randomization.all mesh renderers. Opening this up, we're then going to do sub mesh renderer dot material, and we're going to equal this to be randomization dot all possible materials, and then in some square brackets we're passing in that integer, which is called random material, and that is everything for our randomization. So now we're going to go back to our scene here and actually set up the materials and sub mesh renderer system. So if we go onto our sheep here, you can now see we have these visual randomizations, and if we click plus on this, we get two lists of mesh renderers and possible materials. So I'm going to lock my view here, and I'm going to open up my sheep's model. I want my head to have an entirely random color, so I'm going to put in my head for the all mesh renderers list, and then I'm going to create a couple of materials. So now that I've finished creating my materials, I can actually apply these here. So my head is going to be either light pink, grey, or my black 2, which is a slightly lighter black. Then I'm going to create an entirely new element, so element 1. And within this, I'm removing these head and materials that are already on there. And I want this to control my body colors. So what I'm going to do is drag in all of my bodies. So I have my main body, my tail, and my legs, as well as my ears. I want all of these to be the same wall color, so I'm going to just put all of those in my all mesh renderers, and then I'm going to pass in some materials that those can be. So in this case, it can be a dark black, brown, or white. Now that I'm done with that, if I go back to my scene view and click play, we should now see the animals load in with entirely randomized colors. Here you can see there's a black one with a white head, a white one with a black head, a black one with a dark grey head, and so on and so forth. I think these changes can really bring some interesting life to a scene, and I hope you also agree. If you have enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe and leave a like. If you have any problems with the system or you're looking for other systems, please do leave a comment and let me know, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon.